Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Ingram Orchids and More. In front of the camera is Tristan Ingram himself, and I'm Catherine. I'm behind the camera, making sure that he looks very handsome. And today, our first video ever is going to be fun with fungicides. We're trying to make it as exciting as it can possibly sound. So today we're going to be talking about the most frequently asked questions regarding spraying fungicides on your orchid collection, and Tristan will be the wealth of knowledge we all know him to be. So we will go ahead and jump right into the video. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram at Ingram Orchids and More. I'll make sure to put the link down below and we'll get started. All right, Tristan, our first question.
I would like to say that everybody has different experiences, so everyone is going to have different opinions. These advice that we're giving you is not necessarily meant to be advice. It's more suggestions and our own personal opinions on how to do things. Like I said, everyone has different experiences, so everyone's going to have different opinions on it, and this is just our take on the matter. So don't take anything that I say as matter-of-factly. These are all just things that we're sharing with you, things that we've picked up over the years from our work in the orchid nursery or the orchid business. And we'd like to just share a little bit with the hobbyists and whoever's at home watching, so make things a little easier for everybody.
All right. So our first question is, what is the purpose of spraying your orchid collection with fungicide?
So spraying orchids with a fungicide or any pesticide is something that you want to consider if you have a larger collection, let's say more than just a couple plants. What you're going to be intending to do with spraying is to mitigate either the pest pressure, disease pressure, or whatever it is that you're spraying for. You oftentimes are trying to prevent instead of cure. Oftentimes people come with orchids that already have a problem and they say, what can you do? And oftentimes an ounce of prevention is worth a mountain of curative action. So what we do as orchid growers, whether it be hobbyists or professionals, is we try to prevent problems from happening before problems even make their way into our collection. Because we spend so much money and time on these plants, you want to make sure you take the best of care that you can. And so sometimes we don't always get around to it. Life gets away from us. Maybe we're not always looking at our collection as often as we should, but if we're good orchid stewards, sometimes a little intervention is needed.
So how often should you spray fungicide?
Specifically for fungicides, depending on you and your collection, you may want to have a regimen. Let's say you have a very large collection of plants and you're somewhere like here where we are, blessed to be in South Florida, and you have the ability to grow your orchids outside. Florida's climate is perfectly suited to growing most orchids most of the time, and being able to grow outside is beautiful, but what comes along with that is the endless spores and constant pressure from outside pathogens making their way into your collection. Living in paradise has its upsides and its downsides. One of the downsides is being in a semi-tropical climate. There's going to be a lot of fungal diseases hanging around, maybe blown in on storms in the wind. They make their way into your collection one way or another, and we spray to prevent that. And can you ask me the question again so I'll make sure I get it right?
How often should you spray fungicide?
How often? So for here, me personally, I like to spray at least every month or so. Sometimes, I go a little bit longer without it. Oftentimes people will have the mindset of to spray as little as you can get away with and still effectively keep disease pressure to a minimum. You don't always want to go just blanketing the earth with chemicals because They do have their downsides depending on what you're spraying and how you spray it. But it's a matter of fact that sometimes fungus and disease gets into your collection, and to be a good steward, every now and then you're going to want to do a preventative spray with either a good systemic, topical, or combo of those two.
So are there guidelines different for hobbyists who specifically grow outdoors than those that may grow specifically indoors, or perhaps like a combination? I know some people have orchids that they have indoors specifically and some outdoors. So what do you say about that?
So if you're growing outdoors, let's say what a lot of people here do is they have either their own hobby greenhouse or maybe a larger greenhouse, or they're growing outside on a lanai around their house. In that case, you can still spray a lot of the same fungicides that would be recommended. But if you're growing indoors, you may want to be more careful about what you spray and how you spray it, especially if you're going to be bringing those plants into a part of your home where it's going to be encountered by small children, pets. That's definitely going to dictate how you spray and what you spray. But that goes for growing in the outside environment too. I mean, you have to be diligent about reading the label, knowing what you're spraying, and how the chemical that you're using to prevent one problem might create another problem inadvertently.
What time of day should you spray fungicide?
So that is a good question, and a lot of people have a different opinion on it. I like to spray chemicals whenever I have the chance. Sometimes it's not always the best time of day, and before I get too far ahead of myself, general knowledge and general opinion will be to spray either early in the morning before the suns get real high in the sky and the temperatures rise, or late in the afternoon, right before, maybe 30 minutes or so before the sun goes down. It all depends on what you're spraying and how you're spraying. But if temperatures are lower, maybe you want to spray during the middle of the day so that your plants aren't so cold. But oftentimes for me, it's just whenever I have the free time to do it.
So that leads me to ask, what brand of fungicide do you recommend? Can you talk about affordable options? Because we start talking about orchid chemicals, it gets expensive. It's already an expensive hobby. So what are the affordable options? What are the most expensive? What do you recommend? What do you use?
So with your chemicals, a lot of hobbyists spend a lot of money on these plants. Orchids are not the cheapest plants in the world. And if you're going to invest your time and money into a large collection, it does help sometimes to spend a little bit more on some of these chemicals that are tried and true and are known to be effective disease controlling agents. If you're just a smaller grower, maybe you want to just try something off the shelf at the store, Lowe's, Home Depot, those big box stores. They tend to carry some pretty good fungicides. One of my favorites that you can get easily is DTHE. You can pick up DTHE at any box store. Like I said, you can even probably get it at Walmart. I don't know if y'all can see that. It's DTHE Garden Fungicide. And so before I want to sidetrack a little bit here. When it comes to brand name with fungicide and any of your pesticides, you got to be careful. You got to know what the active ingredient is. Do a little research about what the active ingredient is, down here at the bottom of your label, because sometimes you'll have brands of fungicides that they'll go by the same name, but they may offer different chemicals depending on what formulation or what version of their brand. So it helps to know what chemical it is you're spraying, not just what brand. And so the next thing I would want to talk about would be Dithane M45. So this is something that you can get from you can get it online on Amazon. This is a Southern Ag product. That is the manufacturer of this bottle. But Dithane M45 is something that it's mancozeb is the active ingredient, and you can find this fungicide in other brand names, not just Dithane M45. but this is a great topical fungicide, and everyone should look up the chemicals to know how dangerous they are. Maybe some of them are dangerous and some of them are not so dangerous. And this is just my opinion. This is not me saying matter of fact, but diethane is a less toxic fungicide to use. It's meant to be used on vegetables and ornamentals. And usually if you can use a fungicide on vegetables, not always, but usually that does mean that it tends to be a little bit less toxic, so you're not worried about, poisoning the earth. The next thing I would like to show you that I would recommend is something called Heritage. So Heritage, if you can see that, this is Heritage SC.
Mm-hmm.
So Heritage is an azoxystrobin fungicide, and it's a strobulin. It's in its class strobulin. So this is a systemic fungicide, and for a long time you could only get the commercial bottles for $300-400. But this is a more homeowner / hobbyist friendly size of the chemical. The formulation's a little different than the commercial sizes, but the active ingredient is still the same. It's azoxystrobin, and this is a very powerful broad spectrum systemic fungicide, which we'll talk a little bit more about. It's not very mammalian toxic, so for us, our pets, this is not going to be a super dangerous chemical to use, and it's very effective. I love this personally. I use this a lot. Another thing that if you are in any orchid societies or you talk to anybody who grows orchids or ornamentals in general, a lot of people are going to recommend Banrot. Now Banrot, this is another one of my favorites. So Banrot is a dual combo ingredient fungicide. So on the label it's going to tell you this is a broad spectrum, systemic fungicide. So what we have here in Banrot is a mixture of two different chemicals. One of them is a thiophanate-methyl, which is a systemic fungicide that's very broad spectrum. It's a very old fungicide. It's been used not only for ornamentals and crops, but all sorts of plants. It's a chemical that's taken up by the plant, and it's held in the tissues for some period of time. I forget how long the plant holds on to it, but it does hold on to it. The other chemical in this product is called atrazole, which is added in there for the benefit of controlling a group of fungi called oomycetes, which, if you do any research on oomycetes, those are what cause the dreaded black rot. Everybody who grows orchids in Florida for any period of time will know what black rot is, and it is a scourge of the earth. And Banrot is a great fungicide for stopping Banrot, or preventing black rot from entering your collection in the first place. So this is definitely one of my favorites, one of my go-tos that I use in rotation. So what's another one we got here? Here's one that you don't see used a lot. This is Eagle 20EW. Yeah, right, I've said that right. Eagle. So you can find this as, I believe Spectracide sells it in the box stores as a garden fungicide. The same active ingredient, it's myclobutanil. And this chemical is really good for a lot of rust type fungus, stuff that affects the foliage of your plants. It does have some activity against some of the, the root damaging or rhizome damaging fungi like Rhizoctonium fusarium, but mainly what we use this chemical for, me personally and in the orchid business, is for foliar diseases. So a lot of times, foliar diseases won't kill your plant, but they make it, very unesthetically pleasing, and they can damage a plant if they get out of control. So Eagle is a great product to use if you're wanting to prevent a lot of your foliar fungal pathogens. Not all of them, but just what's listed on the label. And we already talked about Daconil, and I want to say that Daconil is a topical fungicide, just the same as diethane M45 is. Those are fungicides that are going to blanket your plant with a protective barrier, and they're going to either inhibit or stop fungal growth or germination in the first place. And we can talk a little bit more about the difference between topical and systemic later on. What else do I have here to show you? Propiconazole. So this is a chemical that is a very old, tried and true, broad spectrum, again, systemic fungicide. For some reason, I do not see a lot of orchid growers using this fungicide. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it kind of stinks. I can't speak to how toxic this is for us. I don't think it's very toxic, but I could be wrong. I haven't researched propiconazole. This is in the class azole. Azoles are very, very common fungicides, and propiconazole is a pretty good fungicide. It covers a lot of different disease-causing agents, but this is a good one. I like to use it. I don't use it very often. I use it occasionally just to throw something different into the mix. But if you're going to use this, make sure your plants that you're spraying it on, are tolerant of it first. Just because I have success with it doesn't mean that you will. So, take every chemical with caution. Try it out on a few plants before you go spraying your entire collection with it. So earlier we talked about Banrot. And I told you that Banrot was a combo fungicide of thiophanate methyl and a tridazole. So you'll see what people call the holy trinity, or they have a lot of names for these combo fungicide sprays in the hobby world. But a lot of times people like to spray the diethane M45 with thiamyl, or maybe an orthene, which is an insecticide, but we're not talking about insecticides today. So this is thiamyl, and this bottle here is a Southern Ag product, but this is just the one ingredient, thiophanate methyl. And thiophanate methyl, like I said, is a strong, broad spectrum systemic fungicide. It controls and prevents a lot of the disease-causing fungi that infect orchids, but it can be used on your other ornamentals or whatever it's labeled for. That's what I'll say. But this is a great product. It's become very hard to find in recent times, ever since COVID-19 happened. For whatever reason, Southern Ag has had either issues stocking it, supplying it. I don't know. I just know that it's been hard for some people to find. And a good alternative to this would be the brand name, which is Cleary's 3336. It's the same active ingredient. I don't know if the amount of ingredient that's in the product is the same, but Cleary's is a little more expensive, but it works just the same. It's a thiophanate methyl, and you can probably find other brands that are the same thing, thiophanate methyl, but everyone calls it thiamyl because this is the cheap stuff that's easy to get. Well, it was easy to get. What else do we have? So let's say you don't want to use a chemical or a more traditional pesticide like the fungicides that I just told you. There's nothing wrong with using something like horticultural oil. These oils they're a little bit safer to use. Most of them are made from mineral oil. You can use neem oil, but horticultural oil, I'll show it to the camera here. It doesn't have to be this brand. This is just something that I found on Amazon. But oils are protective by, they just cover the leaf surface and they prevent fungal growth. But this is something that, it's not to be discounted just because it doesn't have a fancy active ingredient like the rest of these fungicides do. This is still a useful tool in your arsenal. So what's the next question?
So what would you say is the best place to buy these fungicides? Can you go on Amazon? Do you recommend, DTHE, you said big box stores, your garden stores, but what do you recommend is most cost-effective way?
You can choose on what brands or what companies you want to support. I happen to use Amazon a lot just because it's a lot of times it is the cheapest option and it's quick. It gets to you right away. I would say wherever you can reliably find the product for the price that you are happy paying. So, oftentimes you have to find these online. I told you about DTHE. Eagle is not a product you can find at the big box stores, but I do know that you can find, I think it's a Spectricide product that contains the same active ingredient. You can find those at the stores if you don't want to buy one of these online. But there are a few websites that sell pesticides specifically, and there are a few that I do order from occasionally. DoMyOwn.com, I'm not trying to plug them, but I do use that website for some of the little harder to get chemicals like Heritage. This is a Syngenta product. The propiconazole. Some of these that you want to buy in bulk are oftentimes more cost effective. If you buy them in large quantities, you're paying less per ounce of the product. Banrot. Banrot is something that all orchid growers will talk to you about, but you can't find it at the box store. So either you have to go in with a society, maybe you split up a bag, but if you're going to buy a whole bag like I do, you can find them online on Amazon, or or like I said, any of these pesticide websites that sell them.
Are there any non-toxic fungicides that you may have not have mentioned?
So fungicides do tend to be a little bit less toxic than insecticides because insects tend to be a little closer related to us, and they share a lot of the physiology that we do, whereas fungi are not. And so these chemicals that are negatively impacting fungal pathogens don't tend to cause us as much harm. But that being said, there are some that are a little more toxic than others. You really just need to read up on which chemicals are, how the active ingredient works. And if you Google any of these products, you can find EPA documents about them and the studies that show their effects on humans and pets or mammals in general. I do think that Heritage is a little bit less toxic. Azoxystrobin's not very toxic, but if you're worrying about the toxicity of your pesticides, you need to consider a few things. Is it worth me spraying it? If you think it is worth, which most of us will think it's worth spraying it, are you being careful when you spray it? Which I think we're going to talk a little bit about later. Are you following the label? And the labels on every one of these pesticide products, by law, will have a label that tells you exactly how to use the product and how to stay safe using the product so that it minimizes the exposure to you and those around you.
So what's the difference between a contact fungicide and a systemic fungicide?
So we did talk about that a little bit, but a contact fungicide is either something that just, you spray, and everywhere that the chemical contacts is either going to kill or inhibit fungal growth or disease growth. And those products can oftentimes, wash away because we're watering our plants a lot. Those chemicals will wash away, and once the product has been physically washed off the surface of the plant, oftentimes it's no longer as effective. But some of these products do contain, even though they're topical, they contain surfactants or stickers that keep the product on the foliage for a longer period of time, making it a little bit more effective, even though it's not a systemic product. But you should just read the label to know how long the product is going to be effective for, and how soon after spraying the product you can water or allow the plant to be rained on if there's precipitation in the forecast. You need to keep in mind your weather. If you're going outside, you don't often want to be spraying a fungicide an hour before the rains come. If the rains are coming in an hour, you're too late. It doesn't matter what you're spraying. You want to keep those things in mind. So if you have rain in the forecast, maybe you spray the day before, 2 days before, and that loops back to systemic. So a systemic product is something that is readily taken up by the plant when it's sprayed in the manner that the label describes, and it stays in the plant for some period of time. Each chemical is going to stay in the plant for different amount of times depending on the physiology of the plant and the chemical and the nature of the chemical. But that also brings us to another point. So not all chemicals are systemic in the way that you think. So some are only locally systemic, which means that the chemical stays in the general vicinity in the tissues that it's sprayed, where it's taken up in its initial contact. Others are translaminar. They move up and down the plant freely for some amount of time. And others will move from roots up the plant or vice versa. They'll move from foliage down to the roots. But each one is going to be a little bit different. You need to read into each chemical to find out what it means by systemic. Does the chemical move up? Does the chemical move down? Or does the chemical just stay in the tissues where you spray it?
So should you rotate different brands to prevent immunity?
Take a break. Don't stop it. Just ask me that question again in a second. My breathing. Alright, let's go to the next question.
Should you rotate different brands of fungicide to prevent immunity?
So with rotation, you want to rotate your chemicals, not your brand. Think about it that way. So each chemical is going to have a different group that it falls in. There'll be like group 1, group 2, or group 2A, group 2B, so forth and so on. And those are different modes of action. And so what you don't want to do is spray a fungicide with a similar mode of action multiple times in a row without throwing another chemical into rotation of a different mode of action. So these fungicides work in different ways by interrupting, one of the paths in the cellular process of these pathogens, and each mode will dictate how it does that. And so look at your label, find out what mode of action it has. If you see your Banrot, I can make this a little easier. Thankfully, Banrot puts it right on the front. So remember, Banrot is a double. It's got thiophanate-methyl and a tridazole in there. So you have a group 1 and a group 14. Can you see that on the photo or on the camera? So right there on a lot of them, they're gonna have a little box and they'll tell you what group it's in. So that'll be your key. So if I'm spraying a group 1 and 14 fungicide, and let's say I spray it 2 times in a row, let's say I spray it 1 month and I spray it again, I'm not gonna wanna spray this chemical or this chemical that was in these same group numbers again until I've sprayed another chemical in a different group. And what that does is, just like antibiotics with us in humans, if you throw the same chemical at a pathogen, it's still a pathogen or a disease-causing agent, the disease or the pathogens can become resistant to it. So the disease can become resistant to the pathogen. And what we don't want to have happen is we don't want to have a disease in our collection that becomes resistant to the chemicals that we're using, because then we lose the ability to fight those diseases or pathogens. And so throwing different chemicals with different modes of action is going to prevent, the diseases becoming resistant to our chemicals that we're using to fight them.
How do I know how much fungicide to use?
The label. The label has got everything that you, if in doubt, read the label. The label will tell you exactly how much to use. And a lot of times people will think the label is confusing. Oftentimes the bigger bottles that are more designed for commercial use, they will often have, things listed on there like per acre. So those are not the words you're looking for. There's different ways to calculate it. If it doesn't specifically give you a gallon or per gallon rate, you can do some math to figure out the rate. But oftentimes they will have for ornament. If you go down to the section about spraying ornamentals, oftentimes they'll have a per gallon rate, and it'll oftentimes tell you how much that gallon should cover.
You didn't know you had to do math when you have an orchid collection, did you? So where should I store my fungicide once I purchase it?
So the bags bags or bottles will oftentimes say the exact same thing. Store in a cool, dry place. So oftentimes that could be a garage during most of the year, but if it's somewhere here like Florida where it gets real hot, maybe you don't want to store them in there because a lot of these chemicals can aerosolize or volatile, and then they lose their potency, they degrade faster, and then you walk into your garage and you smell exactly what you're storing in there. So if you have a pantry with a sealed Rubbermaid container, that's up and away from any children or anything like that, and it's not going to be open and exposed to you, that would be a good place to store it, somewhere cool and dry.
Should you wear PPE when spraying fungicide?
Yes, you should. You should wear exactly what the label tells you to. So let's say you're spraying multiple different chemicals. Find the label with the most extensive PPE listed, and that's what you should wear. Every one of these labels is going to tell you within the first few paragraphs what the PPE is. Oftentimes it'll be long sleeve shirt, long pants, socks and shoes, but the next thing you want to look for is, does the pesticide or fungicide that I'm using require a respirator, goggles, full mask, or sometimes they may even require a full Tyvek pesticide suit. So you want to be careful, just because a lot of our newer chemicals that we use in modern age are not as bad as the chemicals we used 50, 60 years ago. Chronic exposure to any of these things can be negative, and you want to minimize your contact to anything that may possibly cause you harm. So just read your label, be safe, use the right PPE, and be cautious and do exactly what the label tells you.
So apart from PPE, what equipment do you recommend to have on hand to spray properly and efficiently?
So oftentimes when I'm spraying, I like to spray with either a pump sprayer or a backpack sprayer, and I also like to keep a bottle of water in my back pocket. The bottle of water is for one thing. It can be free if you get thirsty, but let's say you're not wearing goggles, even though you're supposed to be wearing goggles, or your goggles fall off, you get these chemicals in your eyes. Keep a bottle of water on hand to wash your eyes out, and then quickly get to the bathroom. Not all of these are going to hurt your eyes, but it's best to just be sure. Keep a bottle of water on you, and also what's another thing? I like to keep all my measuring utensils together in measuring buckets, so I can measure how much chemical I'm going to need and make it ahead of time, so I'm not constantly going back and making one batch after the other.
And don't use your kitchen measuring spoons.
Do not use your wife's measuring spoons from the cooking drawer.
We have separate.
Get yourself a dedicated set of measuring spoons, measuring cups, something that you're not going to mind throwing away, or just keeping away, that's not going to get ruined, because you don't want to go scoop your thiophanate methyl with your kitchen spoon, dust that bad boy off on your shirt and go measure out a sugar, vanilla, spice, something you use in the kitchen.
Because it won't be everything nice.
That's a good way to expose yourself to chemicals that you don't want to expose yourself to.
So where on the plant, if you could maybe pick up a plant to show our viewers, where on the plant should the fungicide be sprayed? All over? Avoid buds and or blooms?
Usually, if you have the time and the ability, you want to spray the whole plant top to bottom, covering as many surfaces as you can. Just because it's a systemic doesn't mean that you don't want to get it, even coverage on the plant. You want to cover the top of the leaf, the bottom of the leaf, and the roots. So anywhere that the disease that you're trying to prevent is going to infect the plant, that's where you should usually be applying it, with exceptions, read the label. But usually you just want to spray the whole thing down as best as you can, making sure you cover the plants evenly.
How long does the fungicide need to sit on the orchids in order to be effective?
Well, that is up for debate, but usually you want the fungicide or pesticide to sit on the plant for as long as you can without watering, in a manner that it's not going to damage the plant. Some of these things, like the oils that we talked about, if you leave those on there for too long, you can burn the plant, either from the sun or just suffocating the plant during the hot times of the day. But usually you want your chemicals, your fungicides to stay on there for, I would say, 24 hours would be the ideal. And a lot of these topicals only work as long as they're on the plant. And so a lot of them, you'll notice, it's hard to see, but on these plants there'll be a white residue. People will think there's something yucky on your plants. Oftentimes if you're spraying, that's just your fungicide residue or your pesticide residue. For your topicals, they're meant and designed to stick on there for extended periods of time, even with watering. And that's okay. That's doing its job. It's helping you out.
How do I know if the fungicide isn't effective? What would be the next steps to take?
So let's say you're spraying for an anthracnose, just hypothetically. Ideally, you're going to be spraying your plants before you see the foliar diseases started to begin with. But if you're not, if you're spraying on a regimen and you're doing your rotations, during peak disease pressure, you're spraying routinely. It would not be effective if you start to see it on maybe one plant and then another plant. If you start seeing it in multiple areas and you're spraying regularly, maybe that means that you're not spraying the right chemical. So make sure the disease that you're seeing, maybe make sure it is the disease that you think it is. A lot of these diseases look very similar. If they're foliar diseases, they can look very similar at times. And just make sure that you got the right disease. And if let's say the chemical is no longer, maybe find a chemical that works on that specific disease but with a drastically different mode of action. So just throw something different into the regime to switch it up, hopefully to knock back any disease pressure you're having.
And the last question is, what if I have extra fungicide left over? Does it save well?
You don't want to save it. So, and you also don't want to go pouring it down the drain. So what you want to do is get a good estimate the first couple times you spray, figure out how much chemical it's going to take you to spray your collection and measure out appropriately. Because what you don't want to have is you don't want to end up with 5 gallons of chemical that you can't use because they don't save. Oftentimes that's they may have, say, use within 24 hours of and oftentimes you want to use it before then. But don't be storing these under your kitchen sink in a pre-mix, especially if you're mixing multiple chemicals at the same time. We didn't talk about that yet, but oftentimes you can spray multiple different chemicals, whether that be an insecticide and a fungicide if they're compatible. Those may play well together in the tank when you mix them, but after sitting for extended periods of time with unknown types of water, reactions occur, and those chemicals can either become ineffective, or they may even become dangerous. So you want to use your chemicals when you use them. Mix them and use them. Don't store them. Store them in the containers and their concentrate.
Awesome. So that was a lot of questions, a lot of information that Tristan provided there. If you have additional questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below and we will make sure that it gets addressed. And if you have any video suggestions, if you have something you want to learn more about, drop that in the comment section below too. And make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Happy growing!
We'll see you.